much for coming back. Again, I'll say it, we know this is a big commitment for you, and it is cutting time away from your families and so forth. So we are very grateful that you're taking the time to come back. We're in our third meeting now, and tonight you're going to get an opportunity to work through a series of exercises with the intent of just starting some initial conversations about what, if anything, you might be thinking regarding facility management and planning in light of the needs that you've seen. So tonight, we're going to have a brief introduction of what our objectives are. We'll give a 10-minute, super high-level, brief summary of need. You probably remember the kind of 3 buckets of need we talked about. So we'll just give a real quick flyby just to try and spark your memory of those things, because it will be part of your conversations tonight at the table. And then we've got some new information that we're going to bring to the table as well. And a big chunk of that information is in response to some of the questions that you had or some of the other things you wanted us to take a look at when we did that. And we'll share that information with you, along with some other things that we've done in the interim, which is meeting with staff, students, and some community outreach. After we do that, we're going to preserve this time down in here for a whole series of exercises we're going to do, and we'll explain those when we get to them, and then just close with 5 minutes next steps. So, quick overview of where we're at. You have already been able to endure the first 2 meetings, which is really sharing out with you different types of facility need. And since then, we have gone out and shared that same information with staff, students, and one community outreach meeting. And now we're coming back to you in your first of 3 planning meetings. And again, this is really now taking the information you've been given and having some conversation about what, if anything, to do about it. And we'll incorporate as much as we can some of the input that we received from the other groups. And I'll point back there what those groups told us. We've captured it, and it's hanging on the wall back there. So we're going to be pretty busy tonight, so you probably won't have a ton of time to go back and review that. But that will be, if it hasn't already, it will be posted on the website, so you can go and look at that information as well. So tonight, what we're really after is we're trying to start to understand what your initial thoughts are related to a few very high-level questions associated with facility management and planning of Mercer Island School District facilities. And this graphic is really meant to illustrate kind of the idea of a watershed. So these questions are kind of, in a way, that level. You're going to fall on one side or the other, and you're going to be having discussions about these questions. And we're going to try and share across the entire group what each table discussion is. The objectives for tonight are to have these high-level discussions. These are just the initial get-going, thinking about what, if anything, you might want to do about facility planning. We also want to begin to understand similar and differing opinions in the room. Are all of you pretty much in the same alignment? Are you very different perspectives? Those are all good things, very legitimate, good things to know. We can use that as a basis to further the discussion. And then finally, all the work we're going to do tonight is really to set the stage for more detailed discussions in the subsequent 2 planning meetings after tonight. So, and our job will be to be as nimble as we can and really design what we're going to be talking about in the next 2 meetings, very much dependent on what you tell us tonight. So let's have a quick high-level review of goals, just flying through these things in 10 minutes or less. Just to remind you, of course, that at the core of all this work is the district's core values, vision, and mission. and the buildings are really, all the facility sites, everything are really here to support this at the core. And that's really kind of the headspace we want to be in. And that there are these 7 fundamentals, all of which are on the website. And these 2 are really at the core of this effort. How can your facilities support what the district board is trying to do and the community is trying to do with regard to learning and teaching your kids here? You also at the beginning had a whole series of facility planning committee goals that you identified and went through a series of prioritization, kind of big votes on them. We're going to have you do a sort of follow-up exercise with regard to your goals, and we'll explain that in probably about 20 minutes or so. I'm not going to go through all these in detail. You can kind of quickly read them as we're clicking through. These are, again, the highest level vote getters. They are not all of your goals. All of your goals are over there on that wall, and you'll have a chance to revisit those here in just about 20 minutes. We'll have you look at each one of them in detail. You can see the sort of high-level topics that your goals related to. And then we put this in here just to let you know that we have also been receiving along the way emails from community members that are coming in through Brandy, I think, primarily, and we're capturing those as well. So this is just one example of another Mercer Island School District community member who said this, hey, I want to get this on the radar too. Make sure that this is sort of being, considered, thought about. So we're capturing those things, and those are being included in the goals that you can find on the website as well. So high level, quick review of need. You remember the 3 buckets that we had talked about. And of course, just reminding you that there are 3 white papers that are located on the website, each one dealing with the different buckets. So you can go back and review those at any point in time. We've shared this information with the larger community as well in the community outreach session. So they're there for everybody. The district in our initial need discussion sort of outlined at a high level some various programs that are certainly under consideration when you're thinking about the facilities. We also talked about capacity enrollment and really looked at it's the sort of supply demand sort of question. Do you have enough seats in the district? And this chart represents kind of the core information associated with that. And generally speaking, capacity is not a huge driver, most likely, at least for the next 10 years, based on the projections that we have available to us. You're going to see more of this in a minute, more analysis in a minute. Facility condition, that 3rd bucket, and the scoring, the facility condition scoring that came out of the study and survey. And you probably remember that on just that sort of core scoring, that all your facilities are really in the fair zone. They're scoring relatively highly. And then if you look at the same study and survey, it did an analysis by system in each of the buildings. And this is kind of useful just to try and understand where there might be more targeted issues that you look at individual facilities. Kind of our takeaway from this, which is really the gold circles here, is that of all the facilities, Islander Middle School, building 100, 200, and 300, sort of has across the board, sort of generally the lowest scores by system. So that you might consider that as, just from a numeric standpoint anyway, the buildings that are probably in the worst condition. Island Park and West Mercer and follow that, and they're pretty comparable really in terms of general system condition. And there are some areas here for unique systems that probably want to pay attention to, pretty specifically Press Learning, the route, and the route at Lake Ridge Elementary elementary school. So that gives you a good high-level review of the system. In addition to the scoring, you probably remember there's the question of how long you might expect all of the systems to last in a given building. This happens to be one organization. This is their metric for that. You may have a different metric with regard to what your expectations are. Whatever that metric is, we just want to have you thinking about that as you're thinking about the age of the facilities you have. And here are the ages of the facilities. So here's that 55-year mark. And if yours is, if you expect things to last longer, you can sort of gauge, you can bump that up in your own mind and gauge that and where your facilities are. And you may recall these represent some major modernizations of different facilities and the years that have elapsed since those major modernizations. We also, for each of the schools, and we're not picking Islander as, the example. This is really a example of all of the schools. Our point here is just to say that for each of the schools, there are some significant maintenance needs that the district is also tracking by line item. So it's not just simply a numeric score. The district is well aware of things that are going to need to be dealt with at some point here in time. And that goes for all of the schools, not just Fairfield School, of course. That facility condition also involves, or should involve, this question of educational adequacy. And a very common, there are a couple of common comparisons that are used to assess educational adequacy. One of those would be just a square footage per student metric, and you can compare that to planning numbers nationwide to see where you sit with regard to the typical school at each grade level. And here you see, here are the national levels for each grade level, and you can see how your schools at the elementary, the middle, and high schools are measuring up. And you probably recall we talked about what a difference of 5 to 7 square feet per student might actually mean in terms of diversity of learning environments in a school. The other metric is really comparing your existing schools against your own district's EdSpec, which is a document that says at a given level, so when this building was done, there's an EdSpec created for it. And essentially what that document does is it says, hey, in your district, specific district, if you're going to create a facility for a given grade level, this is what you believe that facility should look like, how big it should be, and so forth. And you can use that to compare against these. Along with those metrics, there are some specific line items that came out of our interviews with principals at each of the schools. Again, we're not picking Island Park specifically, we just grabbed it as one example. For each of your schools, we did this, and we just wanted to remind you that there are at each of your schools a list of line items that are programmatic related that have been expressed to us coming from the principals in these walkthroughs. And this again applies to all of your schools. And then we put this in here because we wanted to let you know that when it comes to educational adequacy, it's not simply the principals that are providing input. Some teachers have also been sort of contacting through Brandy and adding additional information to that. And so this is one example of a high school teacher who wrote in and said, hey, I want you to be thinking about this programmatically too. And they produced a bulleted list of things for consideration. So we're capturing that, and that's really, we're just saying, letting you know that that information is being included as well. And then finally here, you remember this is what we're after, a phased strategic plan relative to your facilities. What makes sense over time, what should go first, and why. Okay, new information. We'll hit this really quickly. How are we doing? Go quick through this. One of the things you asked us to look at when it came to enrollment projections is a comparison of actual to projected. There was a question about that. And so based on the differing projections we had back in time, we created this chart. So that's the 2008, 12, and 17. 2008, you can see, was probably the least accurate here. Although I would say that in terms of accuracy, you're really looking at a difference of about 200 students or so district-wide. And so that is, when you distribute that over all the schools in the district, even that amount, while it's not spot on in terms of accuracy, it doesn't make a huge difference in terms of implication for the facilities. You'll also see the subsequent projections are pretty darn accurate with regard to what the actual enrollment is. And then on top of that, you just should know that the district on a year-to-year basis is also tracking enrollment more regularly. So they're really keeping their eye on that along with the third-party enrollment projections. Someone asked about looking at mid, high, low projections and being able to see that. And here are the latest mid, high, low projections for 2019 through 2029. And you can see the swing here. And very commonly, I would say actually not even commonly, every time we've done a long-range facility plan, it's the mid-range that is used as the basis for that plan. But even having said that, we've taken a look at this and said, well, what does the mid, high, low really mean for you in terms of capacity and enrollment? And that's what this chart is really getting at. So if you look at this bar is your capacity at a given level. Actually, I'm sorry about that. Let's see. That is your current enrollment, your capacity, enrollment, current enrollment, and then the projected enrollment. And so here you see the low, mid, high, and even at the high projections, the worst case, you are about 96 students over at the high school, which at the high school, our experience is that is because a high school can easily take that overage. That's not going to be a big issue for the next 10 years, even if you went with the high. And at every other school, you are within the capacity, not always within the permanent capacity, but in this case, which is the worst, you're within the permanent capacity and then the modular capacity added on top of that. So you're covered, worst case, even in the highest enrollment projection. But having said that, I think it's really using mid as the basis. This makes us feel even more confident and solid that continuing to use the mid as the basis is probably a very reasonable assumption, the right route to take for this. We also had meetings with staff and received additional input from them. I won't go through these in high detail because of just the time constraints we have. Again, these will be available on the website or in the room. So you can see they had a significant number of points to be considered. We met with students at the high school and had some similar input from them, the student perspective, which is always great to hear. And then some additional community input. So that happened on January 15th. And then there was a question about bringing in information regarding maintenance and capital improvement expenditures over time. And so we wanted to be responsive and to show you this so that you could see at a given facility where money has been spent in your capital improvements over time. So this is the pool with 2.8 3 or 4 million, stadium, and everything else is pretty modest. And then these are, of course, the new construction here that was done, and then the modernization work that was done at the high school. All right.
Okay. You also asked us to take a look at. Is that better? Okay. Current design for learning environment. Something over here, static.
That's weird, but it's okay.
I'm gonna go over here. See if it's better. Current design for learning environments, and hearing from your perspective, what's happening around us. We really kept it quite regional. So we're looking at districts and facilities that were recently completed by ourselves, as well as like this project, for example, you'll always see the name of the architect at the bottom. So we're taking a census essentially around the districts that have been mentioned either on this committee or through the staff, student, and community as sort of peer groups. So we're separated out to early learning environments. I'm going to go quite quickly because it is just intended to kind of give you flavor about what's happening in the region with regard to learning environments. This is, of course, Northwood. We're here today. Worked by NAC. And I know what the districts are. I just don't necessarily feel like it's important to call that out. But what we see certainly is, flexibility, operable walls, creating opportunities for niches, shared learning components that are outside of the classroom. This is a Malem project that's on Bainbridge Island. Edmonds, this is a K-8 environment, so beginning to look at what's happening in environments for the intermediate grades, and this is representing then the junior high middle school level work by the SETI. Thinking about circulation and shared learning, commons and congregations a little bit differently than they have been. This is on Island. This is Integra's work for you at Islander Middle School. Seeing again connectivity, folding walls, operable walls between shared learning spaces, expanded learning spaces, and teaching spaces, and then starting to get into hands-on makerspace type components, even at the intermediate level, before we go into the higher education, or excuse me, the high school level, higher grades, excuse me, where we are starting to see some real hands-on work and shop, and so certainly a conversation with the staff, with regard to CCR programs, local work at Raised Bed High School for Shoreline, and then this is under construction for Cambridge Island. Foods and culinary, specialized programs again around CCR, performing arts venues. We heard quite a lot about this from both the students and the staff. Shared learning components at the high school level. And then flexibility between black box and traditional performing venues, or having both in one location. And then again, more shop space, hands-on space, project-based space, usually connected to technology spaces and industry, robotics, etc.
So does anyone have any questions about that flyby, high-level reminder? Yeah.
Wondering about the staff input. From the documents we got, it looked like there were only about a dozen staff there. Is that, were you able to capture more staff? And there weren't any there was only 1 or 2 elementary, and half of the dozen were from the music department.
Yeah, pretty good.
Yeah. I'm wondering, they're our best assets in terms of defining what's needed. So are we gonna get more information from them, or have a chance to capture their needs?
The 2 venues so far would be that meeting and then online. I mentioned some of the staff have been reaching out online and sort of sending emails and adding some input. Short of dragging them in the room, I'm not sure how to get in the room. And yeah, it sounded like it was a little bit, weighted by certain contingents. I would say that that's not uncommon. Folks who tend to, mobilize behind their programs, which is in some ways an admirable thing. They're excited about it. That's great. So what I would say is we will continue if staff would like input via email. we would continue to certainly accept that. I think we're kind of getting to a point where, now that we're in our first planning meeting with you, if we get much further down the road, it will be difficult for us to bring that information back to you in a timely fashion for you to be thinking about.
Do you feel at this point you have enough representation from staff ideas and from what you've seen in terms of other projects that you've done?
Yeah.
I really wouldn't want them to.
I personally do. Yeah, I personally do. Frankly, for I would say most districts that we do this with, and this is largely driven by time demands on the staff. Districts are somewhat reluctant to ask their staff to come in. And so we commonly only get to even speak with the principals, and administration people. So I think here it's just nice that there are two venues to both email online and this meeting to try and reach out beyond that. They're busy. It's hard. So, any other questions? And I know that, yeah.
How are decisions on maintenance made in the district? So you had a list of things that.
Yeah.
Is it inside the maintenance guy or the committee
The question was, how are decisions made by the district regarding maintenance? And I think you're kind of getting at who determines what needs to be dealt with first and highest priority.
I mean, that's a big part of it, is priority, student safety. What's impacting the day-to-day education. Safety, security, obviously is number one. Budget does come into play. We try to process the teachers' requests and weigh out those different factors as they come along. A lot of times we feel like we're just firemen. If we put the fires out, the dishwasher goes out, we have to replace the dishwasher. The chairs break, we have to weld the chair. There's a lot of that happens on a day-to-day basis as well.
Yeah, so not to belabor the point, but I was wondering if you're firefighting all the time, how do you ever get to the really important long range stuff,
Right.
you're building automation system or something important like that?
And those are technically, most of the time, those are levy issues, levy items, anyhow, they're done through the capital levy, which is a bigger project. My guys don't are typically put in a full intercom system, things like that. We are the day-to-day maintenance handyman, I guess, throughout the district. But installing a new big toy, or we do take on some projects like in the stadium. Our staff did build the press box, the new press box concession stand. That was probably the largest project I've done in over 30 years for the district, though. That was truly a unique project. But
we do have a list of projects that were laid out initially when the capital levy was originally passed and what was put forward to the voters as to these are some of the things. And we do an update to the board on that at least annually, I think twice a year, as to where we are with those. But there are times when things occur that we have to push things out another year on certain projects because of dollars, because something else happens that then takes priority.
All right. If there aren't any more burning questions right now, I want to keep us on schedule. I'm sorry I have to be a little bit of a taskmaster because we've got a lot of things we want you to be able to work through. The first thing is we're going to randomize you guys a little bit for some of the exercises. So what I'd like you to do is we'll go through each table and just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then restart 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and just remember your number and then sit at the table with your number. So that's the first thing. Remember your number. Okay. So would you like to be a 1?
2, 3,
4,
5,
1,
1,
2.
oh, 2,
And 3.
4, 5,
1,
2,
3,
4,
5,
1,
2, 3,
4, 5,
1,
2,
3, 4, 5.
Fantastic. Great. So remember your numbers. Okay.
say.
Yeah. So now we're going to shift gears a little bit We will give you a break too, by the way. We've got this series of exercises we'd like you to do. The first one of these is what we're kind of calling confirmation of your committee planning goals. And what's really behind this is, think way back to meeting number 1, and we had you sort of brainstorm some goals that you might think should be considered or really applicable, or things that are important to work towards with regard to managing your facilities in support of education. Now you know more, presumably, I hope you know a little more than you did when you walked in the room that first evening. And what we'd like you to do is to tell us whether or not the goals that you had and the way you prioritize them would be the same for you now, or would you prioritize them in a different way, or if you might even add a goal or two. And so for this exercise, there are 3 pieces of paper on the windows. Those are your original planning goals. And off to the side, I'm going to move over here, and I'm going to get out of range. Over here, you see round 2 votes. These round 2 votes would then apply. So for the goal, provide visible sustainability. If you thought that was really important, you would put a red dot. The red dot? Yeah, red dot here. Okay. You'd say, yeah, I still feel that way, or I don't feel that way, so I'm not going to put it up. And then likewise, these votes relate to these goals over here. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. On the table, we have little packets of 3 red dots. Each of you can pick up one of those packets, and we'd like you to go back and read through. It's important, I think, that you kind of read through. We're going to give you 10 minutes to do this. You're going to scan through all the goals really quickly, and then put your 3 dots on 3 different, in other words, don't stack the deck again. Don't put 3 dots on one. On 3 different goals that would indicate your current thinking regarding priority. And it may be the same as you felt before, which is totally fine. We just want to know if anything has changed with regard to your prioritization. And we will gather all this and track it. So for the next 10 minutes, that is the objective. And then after you finish that exercise, what I'm going to have you do,
Quick question, you have 3 panels,
Yes.
and we have 3 dots,
That's right.
and we can only put them on all 3 panels, just 3 things.
That's right. So you have
Really
things
selective.
really selective.
Thank you.
And it doesn't have to be one dot on one on each one.
Right.
It can be 3. Okay, great. And then as soon as you're finished with that, then I'd like to pull you back in, and then we're going to go through a second exercise over here, which I'll explain after you finish that. So at about 6:17 or so, I'm going to pull you back all together again. So grab your dots and go at 10. Go for it. There may have been two separate goals for that. Oh, yeah. Two separate goals.
Occupational learning, there's more opportunities for occupational learning in development or CCR.
Yeah.
And even the ones that. Yeah.
So you are close. You just keep it simple. Yeah. Right.
Had one. Yeah.
Yeah. I know, it happens, right? I can't believe that. Yeah. One lady just left for Israel yesterday.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yep.
Yeah. Others will. Yeah.
Yeah, I read.
Yeah, we actually. Oh, yeah.
Oh, Rich. So, oh, right.
Sam went.
Sam.
With Emma. He is, yeah, so he actually, because of us and because of stuff, he came back from Israel and did one start, and so he only had one more quarter to finish his AA. So yeah, our 18-year-old young boy, who now is a junior. Yeah. Oh my gosh. I mean,
Right, it makes sense for a lot of things.
yes. And that's actually Sam did the perfect thing, because he came back and he was like, okay, I'm done. He did play baseball and he did play basketball, but
He had also he had his friend groups.
right. And yeah, he was pretty social. And then you know what? Honestly, that and he's a big kid, and so he was kind of
Yeah.
you know, he was USY, which he was BYO, and he was USY. But and he was like it's still so that's who he socialized with mostly. So yeah.
Okay, so we're going to move on to our next exercise. On your table, you're going to see two little piles. This is the last dot exercise, by the way. Two little piles of blue dots. One with 6 and one with 3, so 9 total. That corresponds to these 9 spectra here. And what we're asking you to do is, in light of the planning goals that you just read, again, your own goals, and in light of what you have seen for each of the schools and remembering some of it, and your own experience in these schools, let us know how well you think these schools are doing. So we'd like you to place 1 dot on each line where you feel the school falls on the spectrum. So for example, if Island Park Elementary is really meeting the goals that you've established, you would say, absolutely, it's meeting that. It's doing a good job of it, and you put it here. If you're like, I don't know, not really too sure, maybe you're in the middle. And if you're saying, there's no way it's meeting the goals, you're going to be swinging towards this end. So for each one of the facilities, based on what we've shown you so far and what your knowledge is of the facility, we'd like you to take one of these dots and put it along this line. And if you have 4 or 5 people kind of clustering around the middle, it might be good to start kind of stacking them above and below, just so we're able to clearly see graphically how many people are really falling where they fall. Yes.
So I'm saying it's our perceptions of it.
Yeah, that's right. It's based on what you have said and what you think should be a goal for the facility. So we're going to give you about 8 minutes or so. Yes. Oh, yes.
So, yes, if you think that the facility really needs.
No, yes is does the facility meet long-range planning goals, which means is it doing what it should do relative to your goals? And you say, yes, it is doing a good job. And you go here. If you would say, you know, I'll just push it to an extreme limit and hopefully this won't put words in your mouth. No, it's an old school that in no way meets the planning goals we've set for this, that, and the other thing. You say, no, it's not doing a very good job.
So it's based on the 3 goals that we personally.
No, it's any one of these goals up here. If you want to use your prioritization, that's certainly fine. But you've read through the goals that everyone has said. Some of them are about occupational learning, so that's probably going to apply to certain levels. Some of them are about flexibility.
So it's kind of as a whole.
It's as a whole. It's as a whole. Yeah. As a whole. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to give you about 8 minutes or so to get up there. 1 dot per spectrum. Okay? Go. And after you have completed this exercise, remembering the number that you are, go sit at that table.
Just where it wasn't with the vision, and then we had using that space and activities and camps and so. I didn't go look at it in great detail. Yeah. So sustainability guy. Yeah. And I think that may be a reaction because people assume that they're no. Yes.
Just gonna give him one yes. Make him feel better about himself.
I'm super glad. So remember to go back with your number to the table with the same number. Yeah.
And you're welcome to it. I'll go over to number 4. Anybody sitting here?
I did the wrong thing. I did too. I was like, great.
You're a 4 also.
I'm a 4. I'm a 4.
Yes.
How are you? Good to see you.
Number 3.
Yes. Oh, good. How was the rest of your day? Was it fun?
Oh, really?
I love that. Oh my gosh. I judge, so I don't even know what to go into that. I just,
We're chaperones.
Yeah. Event coordinator. I like that. I didn't even know I had a title last year. It's like I really love
The judges. And it was good.
Yeah. The first person to get out wasn't she was so she said there was a time back to almost just to kind of like, you relish. Absolutely.
One, two, 3, 4, 5. All right. So you're all at the table that aligns with your number. And you're going to find at the table, flipped upside down, a page. And all we want you to do is just put your names on this page so we know who is at what table. You send that around. Beware, by the way, that these Sharpies will soak through. And if they soak through on a table, which you can write on the back of these, it will stay on that table.
And then you add was here.
And it's your name, so they know.
Was here, so it wasn't touched, right?
Yeah, so it's kind of a little table sign-in sheet.
So true.
I'm going to orient you to a few things. One of the things you're going to want to do right up front is nominate a sort of scribe. The scribe doesn't have to take copious notes or anything like that. Nominate a scribe, someone who will take some modest notes. And that person, that same scribe or another person will be the kind of report out person for your table. It could be the scribe. And what we're going to be wanting to hear is after you have some conversations that will cue you up for, that person will report out in like a 1-minute segment the overall summary of the key things your table talked about and where you kind of landed. And I'll explain this in a little more detail. So each of these sessions we're going to do, there are 4 of them, will include a 5-minute introduction where we're going to explain what you're going to be doing. They're all very similar in terms of the process. You're going to have a small group discussion of 10 minutes. So we really want you to kind of just get in there and hit the question at hand at a high level. determine sort of where you guys are landing. Are you all following the same page, or is there a division amongst you that you might talk a little bit about? After that 10-minute discussion, each table will report out to the group. You're going to say, hey, we're table number 1 over here, and we all agreed that that this was really something that was important, and this is why. And you're going to do that in 1 minute. And after you've all had a chance to hear what each table has sort of talked about, then we'll leave 10 minutes for any discussion, questions, and answers. You can say, hey, table number 1, why did you guys think that way again? That doesn't make sense because we're at the opposite side of the spectrum over here. We don't agree. Okay? All right. So that's kind of the overview of it. We are a smidge behind, just a few minutes behind, 9 minutes behind. So I do want to maybe ask your forgiveness in that we can either pick up the pace, which I'll try and do a little bit, or we might kind of run slightly over our 8:30 time. I'm hoping we don't. I'm going to try and keep it to that if we can. The first question we have is at the elementary school level. And the question is, you can read it, in the context of 30 plus years, which we're going to define that as long term for purposes of our discussion. What makes the most sense to you regarding facility management and planning of your existing elementary schools? Continual renovation, which I'll explain that in a second. Modernization, I'll explain what that is. Or prioritized replacement of existing schools over time, and why. So in front of you, you're going to see one of these sheets, and it says across the top, elementary school level. Here you see it. And you're going to see across the top the question. Your existing elementary schools, what makes the most sense? Continual renovation. And this over here, this column, is what would fall under continual renovation. It's essentially significant maintenance items. These are things like roof replacement, fencing repair replacement, parking lot grinding, drainage, stucco replacement, flooring replacement, things that you just have to fix over time when they wear out. That is an approach. Okay, we're just gonna fix that stuff. Modernization brings it up to a next level, because these are additive now. If you get into modernization, what you're saying is you believe that you should not only fix stuff over time, fix your capital investment, but you should also consider looking at full seismic upgrades, full energy efficiency upgrades, and this is of your existing schools now. Full plumbing replacement on an as-needed basis. You just don't go in and replace it, obviously, but if it's needed. Full heating, ventilation, cooling replacement as needed. Full electrical replacement, full technology upgrades on as needed. So you're really going through the whole system now and prepared to do that. So you're not only doing this, but you're doing this. And then this box, as part of modernization, takes it a step further. This is educational adequacy. You can do all of these things and not impact anything regarding program alignment. If you feel that the schools need to provide, say, more flexibility or different learning environments, that's what this diagram is supposed to show. It's basically saying, hey, here's your existing school, and we know that we need to create different types of learning environments within the existing school. And in order to do that, it's going to decompress. It's going to push out certain things we already have. So we're going to have to do an addition to the existing school in order to make those types of learning environments. We also know under this category, based on conversations with the principals and other staff, that there are specific programs that could also be improved at the elementary level. So the addition of a gym, so you didn't have that multi-purpose room, it changes to the SPED programs, and a series of other items specific to programs throughout this. And then finally, this is a leap. That's why there's this line here. It's like a change of approach. You might say as a group, yeah, we should be doing this thing and dealing with it over time. But ultimately, what we really want to be doing is looking at, instead of doing all of these things, if you feel that your people in your group feel this way, we should be looking at replacement at the appropriate time. And then that starts to inform how deep into this you're going to go. And replacement really means you're now going to be aligning with your educational specs that are at a given level. You're going to be aligning with district standards. It's going to meet or exceed current building code, probably both structurally and from an energy standpoint. And on a case-by-case basis, you might have some opportunity for some potential improvements at the site as well. Yes?
What's the minimum time that would pass before you would replace any of these structures? So are you gonna make, like Lakeridge, wait 30 years and then tear it down and replace it, or would that happen soon?
That's kind of a question. First of all, it's a great question, and that is really a long-term planning question. So we are not showing a slide here, but I will say this verbally at the risk of using a little more time. You've got a great long-range planning hat on right now, because as you're looking at the age of your facilities now, and you think about what your community might be able to do, let's just say if you're doing replacement over time, right? A major structural replacement, you're not going to be able to do them all at once. It's just impossible financially, right? And so you're going to say, okay, that means we're going to do it in phases, and I'll just throw out a number. If you do it every 10 or 15 years or something like that, don't quote me on that number, but I'll just pick it. You're not going to get to the third project for 30 to 45 years from now, which means that if the building is 65 now, it's going to be 110 by the time you get to it. So that's a good way of thinking about it. So I'm not going to say anything more about that, but that's a good way to think about it. Yeah.
What is the status of the earthquake retrofits of all these schools? Where are we on that right now?
Yeah, we touched on that a little bit last time. Based on the structural report that was done for the district, really none of the schools they felt are in concern of collapse. So, however, you can, based on the condition of them, expect, depending on the size of the earthquake, that there could be substantial enough damage that you could not use the building again. You may have to replace it.
Thank you, now
Yeah.
I recall that.
Yeah. So what we're going to ask you to do here is we're going to add.
One
Yes.
quick question. Under the modernization column.
Yeah.
When you say potential 7-year building, that's from the time of modernization?
Yeah.
Not just extending it to 70 years?
Right. So that's a great question too. So the way we kind of think about it, and the way I think it's useful for you to think about it, is if you are going beyond a basic sort of renovation, which is just picking up maintenance items, and you go into this category, which is additive, and you say, our approach is not to replace, but to try and get in here and do everything we can to reuse the existing building, including major or full system replacement of that building. And we're going to address the educational adequacy component as well. The intention of that is you're basically trying to get a new building via reusing the old one you have. You're going to do enough to it that you're essentially, think of it as a full modernization of that building at that point in time. And I would say, I want to point out here at the top, we're not really thinking about money at this point in time, but I do want to point out that, renovation, we're sort of saying $1 to $2 signs. That's kind of the minimal sort of dealing with it. Modernization is 3 to 4 plus, and replacement is 4. And the reason we have a little plus here is that there are instances, it's not always, but there are instances where full modernization of existing facilities can exceed the cost of a new replacement building. Okay, so just sort of putting that out there. So what you're going to do,
Can you give us 2 examples of something that might be uncovered that will cause that to be more than a replacement? Because based on the age of our buildings, do we need to think about asbestos? Do we need to think, those are things that would push it?
Right. Well, it's it's probably a little bit less of uncovering things. It's really oftentimes more associated with the approach to how you modernize it. So someone may say on a given facility, and this may or may not be the case for your district, an existing school is beloved by the community because 3 or 4 generations have attended that school, and we want to preserve the image or character of it. And so there, you have to basically preserve the facade of the building, and everything behind that, including all the insulation and everything, becomes new, basically. And so if you're doing that, you're selectively demolishing things, and that can become more expensive. To some extent, there are cases where if you're doing full modernization, just the act of having to do selective demolition over time and increasing the construction time they're there, that can have a significant
Like still
impact as
having
well.
school while this is going on, and
Yeah, and
maybe
there are
planning for
operational
summers.
considerations as well. So, here, if you're replacing it, the target would be you're trying to replace it in a way that you can maintain existing operations. Over here, you're going to have to do it in phases that try and minimize disruption as much as possible. Okay? All right. So what the exercise is you have a conversation about it, let's say an 8-minute, 9-minute conversation. And at the end of that conversation, each one of you is going to take a pen, and you, in your own opinion, will check a box of where you fall as an individual. Okay? So if you're a person that feels that at the elementary level, only renovation, so significant maintenance, is the way to go, that you don't want to really go any deeper than that, you would put a check for you in one of these boxes. If you are a person who says, no, from a planning standpoint, we really need to be, I'm a person who believes we should reuse our facilities to the absolute max. I don't believe in replacement. I'm just saying this right now. I don't believe in replacement. And I do believe that we should be looking at full modernization over time, but not educational adequacy. You see how this box is divided in half? You will check the top half of the box if you only want to go that deep into the activity. If you feel that you want to go into educational adequacy, check the bottom half of the box as an individual. And likewise, if you are in the replacement sort of approach at this elementary level, you would check this box. Yes?
Real quick question. So this is applying, we're associating this to all elementary schools.
All elementary schools as a high level approach. Yeah. So your conversation in 8 minutes or so is going to be granted very high level. That's why it's sort of this watershed question here. All right. And then at the end of that 8 minutes, we want you to check this. I'll time you. Check the box. When your appointed share out person is going to stand up, and in 1 minute or less, just sort of hold this card up and say, this is where we landed. You can see where our checks are. The main point of our conversation was really centered around X. Most of us felt we should do this, as you can see, and this is why. That's all you're going to say. All right? Excellent. Go for it.
Well, in my mind, at the elementary level, we've got more planning for our
I'm a new, because in 30 years, we're going to be find a way to make it work, and even if it's whatever it is, and start replacing schools, because this, to me, ends up costing almost as much as these approaches. I mean, I've been reading things about like Westminster College. You hear the water running during rain. And I was like, yeah, in that report, I was like, oh my gosh, this doesn't sound great. This sounds like this is going to be awesome. It's coming back, but things. How do you access that? There are major building issues going on that this would be what the approach is in over time.
not gonna get better,
And
right?
also
So like,
like
Island Park,
30 years out. For me personally, this doesn't make
that area
sense.
is so much better.
And this week, I've been in 3 of the different schools, are just what you see happening in the different schools based on space constraints. This is not sustainable for another 30 years. This isn't what I want for my child or anyone else's child sitting in the hallway.
I know it's so hard to because we're mom.
Yes.
I know.
Yes.
Well, I've heard,
My family was the poster child, or poster family for the mom that failed.
I feel like one thing they're not talking about is the
Yeah.
community's stomach for this.
So there are people to be that getting to like doing this in our current I mean, I feel like that would be really difficult.
Island Park is a good opportunity, lots of fields in the back, and there's that one field on.
Like you feel like out of
Well, that's why they're.
No, but I think that's why I'd like to see.
Well, I'm one I would like to see. No, I was on the bond too. Because like for most buildings, I think you could be here, but I think for how our schools are built, by the time you do all
Yeah.
this.
You're at that price.
Right.
It's the initial age, it's the actual age
When
of
I
our building.
looked at our schools, like Island Park would be awesome to move back.
And build
Away
it
from
around that.
away from the street. Yeah. Just as a safe. Yeah.
This is
Stay in the school.
neighborhood. Just to be clear.
Educational advocacy too, right? Like,
This is, to me, this is a given. Even if we do this, the minute we buy one of these, we're
You're
starting
doing
on
this.
Right.
So this,
That's
Like they
this
have
is
to,
always.
like they have to.
it is, and it will be going on over time. I mean, this
We
is
do
10
this
years.
to our house,
Every 10
and we're
years.
still doing this, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's good, because there's gonna be schools that are gonna be on the
Yeah.
you have to do that.
And there's 450 kids using it, so yeah, things are gonna happen.
Yep. And I prefer this just because I think you could save turtles. But at the end of the day, if you're going there, just
I know, it's just.
That's why I'm here too, like, if you can make all this stuff, I would
emotionally, I'm here. Intellectually,
But
I
then
just.
it's like, because then does this really get you?
Does this get you actually what this would? No. You're still gonna be making concessions. And there's never a perfect building, but when I'm in here, you're very smart buildings here instead of in like Island Park. Yeah, you can't imagine Island Park having a space like this with the constraints of the building. I'm at Island Park. Yeah, my daughter. Yeah, she's in first grade.
I mean, but you saw data from all sides.
was the school part of the law. It's interesting to see what's different in school.
I'm an architect.
Yeah.
Even dudes, yeah, even if
The district would ever consider facilities not counted to rebuild during more elementaries. I know we love our small elementaries, but would they ever consider combining? So in order to have one building instead of several? And we would have a larger elementary school, that is true. But we would have one building, and then for the property that's there, I mean, I love the partnership with the Boys and Girls Club, this is still district's land. Is there another business or something that would want to do it, or would that be where we are with photos? It can also be our community center, because our community center does not have a pool. Is there some smart way to do this? I'm thinking about making it more affordable for,
Well, how long is this?
one of the reasons we did this. Like 600 or 700, even 700 kids in the school. Combined all of them, it'd be 1,200 kids.
And we're so unique.
Right.
Nice to get kids.
Yeah.
Meeting at a different point of their life.
Yes.
It's hard to.
Another minute or so until check time.
The sites are pretty small, and the impact to the neighborhood that get the next school.
Our mega block right now is our libraries are so many.
I mean, to your point, all of these things are really, and so, to me, that's even if you live in this place, right? So why not get there as tight as you can, right?
Yeah.
Just
It's the last one, but it's
yeah.
gonna need it.
Modernize the things you need, get as much of that as you can, but spend as little as you can because it's a deficient asset. I'm not saying that for sure, but I'm arguing the point because strictly from a financial perspective, these things just ultimately shoot up this. Why would you spend a bunch of money? Again, I'm not advocating for it. I just
No, that's what some community.
no, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. I think to me that the category you have to do this.
Remember, this is not your final answer necessarily. A little pressure off. So I'd like you to put your checks in the boxes
Because you're doing that.
as a first stab at this conversation.
If you can show cost effectiveness, this is gonna be much less. But if it's yeah. Right there. But if the dollars is less than us, and you can get this,
Cost
if you can get here.
Yeah, so I mean, this if the preliminary says it's the same, then we replace it.
But I don't think
And that's what we need to bring.
Are those checks in the boxes coming along?
He said I messed up. But, he did.
If I do it over here, does it come really close?
So I did.
I don't know that that has anything.
Anyone need a pen to put a check in the box?
So wait, are you there?
He's very close to it.
I'm very close to
Depends on
replacement.
the
I decided to pick a
Okay, we'll
donation.
just talk about
You did, I'm sorry.
If this.
So this doesn't have to be your final approach on it, it's just getting this conversation
No,
going.
he doesn't
Okay,
want to talk
that's
about money,
right.
but it's a big.
That's right.
Assuming we all live
Here,
here.
you cut us out.
We should have one replacement. Just
Well,
since
no,
we're so
I
close
think
to
that
it.
you're, but I think in our notes say, that's part of our notes, like, this is, if this comes it to that. Or if this could get to the same, if we replaced it, but we can get that same program. To me, it's a double. Yeah. they're the same.
Yeah, we said typically dollars, but bigger.
Okay, have you all assigned your spokesperson?
Modernization.
If modernization.
Okay. Are you guys ready to have we've got a spokesperson coming up, and he's going to share in about 30 seconds to a minute the high-level view of what they're able to talk about.
4-to-1 replacement over modernization with the plus.
Yeah, educational adequacy.
The key thought was the current elementary schools are so inadequate right now structurally that they don't meet the standards that have been set by this school here, and we need to bring the schools up to this particular standard. And the only way to do it economically is to do it replacement over a period of time. The one vote here for modernization was taking into consideration the cost, the potential cost of doing wholesale replacement over a period of time. And given the history of levies that failed here in Mercer Island, that may not be feasible. But nevertheless, that was the majority vote.
Great, perfect, thank you. How about you guys?
So group 2 was aligned. We all believe in replacement, all 5 of us. We felt like similar to group 1, we need to start planning now to replace our elementary schools, especially kind of given what we see on this, where especially Island Park, Lake Ridge, and West Mercer are in need of some significant redo, and that led us to replacement, given that they have extra space on the land potentially that they could use. It brings us educational adequacy. It helps with traffic and safety. It helps with flexible learning spaces. So there's a lot of wins, and we felt like we need to start planning ahead, given the life of these schools.
Great, thank you for the overview. Table 3.
Okay, table 3, the renovation is gonna be going on anyway, because
Yeah.
it does go on all the time, constantly. And we felt like we actually agreed after a good discussion that if we can meet our educational goals in modernization by addressing the lower portion here, and less cost than the replacement, we would go there.
Okay.
So that's where we were. We have several who have been involved with past bonds and know how hard it is to sell the community unless we can really make a good case for it.
Yeah, great, thank you. Back here?
So table 4 is a special agreement with table 2 and table 3. So the thinking is that we're gonna have to do renovations anyway. I think that the roofs still need to be repaired, particularly in this time frame. If you do a replacement, in addition to the other things that were said, it would be an opportunity to do some sustainability improvements in a way. I think the technology is going to get cheaper and it'll be more affordable, and so you could do something like gray water and panels and things like that. And given the the spaces are grim. They're cinder block with low ceiling and not a lot of light. I mean, we voted for replacement.
All right, thank you. Maria?
Our group was 4-1, and trying to think of the land constraints that came with each elementary school and how that made the different situations, differently, preferably, and especially talking about how Lake Ridge kind of might work better with a modernization, while Allen Park and West Marshall might work better with a replacement, considering the need to kind of displace students during a modernization, and also thinking about the space as a whole and how when there is not a lot of empty space right now to expand, it's more realistic to try to do a replacement because it wouldn't require the displacement of students.
Great, all right. So that was 4 replacement and 1 for a full modernization. Including educational adequacy. Great. That was great, guys. Good job. All right, so we're going to do the same exercise for each level. So now you're familiar with the shtick, okay? Question here, you've got a card that's middle school, and obviously the new building, as you have already noted here, good condition. Buildings 1, 2, 3, not so good. So this sheet is for buildings 100, 200, and 300. So don't be thinking about the new building now, obviously. Okay? And the question is, the district has studied options to fully replace the middle school rather than to continue to renovate or modernize the existing older building. So they've looked at different ways, possibilities to do that for 100, 200, and 300 buildings. Does this approach make sense to you to replace those buildings versus renovate or modernize them? And why or why not does it not make sense to you or make sense to you? Okay, so about 8 or 9 minute conversation around that question.
Okay, I haven't been in these buildings.
I'm team Max. There's plastic. There's storms. I was like,
You can't modernize next to it.
you can't.
So,
And that's
Smaller. It's not like I feel like that one's gonna be easier to sell as far as replacing it. I'm going
so what were the arguments just to do the flag screen? And I think we're all in there, right? So to say, how would you talk yourself out of it?
I don't know. After seeing it, I can't. I was gonna say, why is that falling apart when it's newer than the old ones? I think they still.
Going back to
They absolutely would.
I don't know why we, yeah, it's kind of like pretty lipstick on tape.
Wait, the one right where they're running, the turf field?
Connect it to the other campus.
They're not like there's
Oh.
yeah. Well, and there's a library over there.
You could probably do a double story building, right? Maybe a 2-story building on a smaller property.
Okay, so would you
Start in the summer.
I'm just doing the freshman year. Is there
That's what they did with
if you
the
would
other
think
one,
about
and there was a ton of portables.
where does this knowing that half the schools are related to say $40 million.
So here's what I think will happen. You will come back with something like modern parks and do this and that will happen. So it's kind of like you gotta hit them with check and then you come back with like, we will have all this instead. And then middle school, I mean, all of those elementary kids are coming and there are more. I hear what you're saying. I'm in there are so many kids coming. It's insane. Our numbers have gone. So I'm like, okay, I don't believe in the numbers. We've never had families. So many. Wow, this is interesting. Yeah. So I'm just like, okay, is there some other factor about it? Perhaps I missed. So I'm just thinking like the middle school, we're gonna need this, and then high school as well. I don't know. For some reason, to me, the middle school they seem maybe it's because I think this is a better chance of getting lost. All the kids are yes, every family. Whereas my Saturday, I want to do hard. Yeah, but if it's in middle school,
And then the worst thing,
every child teaches the families when they don't have to figure they don't. I would say that they don't.
Besides
Yeah, the money for sure. It would be a pure money.
What's the percentage of our student population who are affected? Right?
I would check it out.
Actually, or you can even push it down. Who knows? You could do different things. And it's like, you could do sixth grade pod.
We're trying to do the middle school and a new gymnasium cafeteria combination for each elementary school. Or something like that when you get part of that. You might not get everything at once, but every elementary school is going to get, and that's how we do it. Instead of saying just Island Park, we could say a new gymnasium and cafeteria for each elementary school. And next is like, we're going to do special ed integration for each elementary school. And like, if we do it in ways like that, there's more buy-in. It's just so like, because for me, when I just seeing the space there. And we can use this space for preschool first.
Spots actually collaborating in the bar. Yes, it's like wow, that's amazing.
I mean, I don't know how.
I was gonna say, how we could close that in as part of the right here. Yeah. No, I think they all need to make it more for that's just, it's.
That's true, they know.
Empty sites.
We certainly do hold on to
Yeah.
will this benefit this way? Elementary. But I want everything to go because that's what keeps your community.
Yeah.
It's 7, 8, yeah. So I researched school districts in Boston. I researched them that would be ninth graders. Basically compared to yes, using and then yeah. Where I mean,
So ground classes, would you like a more free?
and in my 8 years, 2 times I did this.
I'm just gonna run to the grocery store before anybody else is up and you'll run into.
And I do.
You're wearing a bond in your ponytail.
And you're just like, come on, because I
Just do that, you'll run into.
Okay, start taking your checks in the boxes if you haven't started already.
So I grew up in this narrative on that.
Maybe a couple more minutes and then we'll start to report out.
And you're like, because I couldn't get away with anything growing up. Because everybody was so right. Yeah, it was in the country of Pennsylvania, like in the countryside. Very
Like instead of going over the, I just remember right behind you. And then as soon as you come
Okay, I think everyone appears to have their boxes checked. Would you guys like to start again? Got a report out?
Well, this one was a little bit more difficult for us. As you can see, there are 2 on the full modernization, there are 2 on the replacement, and there's some ambiguous one right in the middle between the 2 of them. So the idea, we didn't have enough information to make a clear distinction between the 2 because we didn't know what the design was going to be or what the costs were going to be. We thought there could be a modernization, a full modernization that would integrate the 2 buildings and make them more secure, but we weren't sure. That's because the 2 of us thought that you could do that, and the other 2 thought it was easier and more efficient to just replace, to enhance those 2 values, integration and cost. And this one person here was right in the middle.
Great, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, group 2 was aligned again on replacement. We believe that given that
You were supposed to be randomized.
well, we were. So this was a little harder discussion at first, but then we all realized we were landing in the same spot. I mean, especially given that what was built at the middle school was only 3 years ago. We say there was probably a phase 2 design out there that we could implement in the near future to connect the buildings. Maybe we use a smaller footprint in the future, or maybe it's 2 stories. We put the kids on portables for 18 months again. We felt like this was a good decision now, given kind of what already happened 3 years ago, and that we want the kids, it impacts every student in Mercer Island School District. We want those kids to have a good learning environment as well. So that's where we landed.
Great. Table 3?
Table 3 is all in agreement. This time we would like to replace the middle school because we feel like it's in such terrible shape, the old part of it, and that it was the first one that was built with the the modernization, rebuilding schools, and it was the most cheaply done. And you're seeing the results of that now with the plastic windows. So we felt strongly that should be replaced. And we felt the community would go for it because all the kids go through the middle school. So it'd be easy to do it. Maybe we could tack on one elementary school on with that, or, you know,
Or
or
what
a
we-
gym, or
We thought maybe what might be more palatable to the community, because I know if I'm hearing, oh, Lake Ridge is getting rebuilt, my kid doesn't go there. But what if we did all of the new gym and cafeterias for the elementary schools at the same time? And then everyone's like, wow, my kid's going to get a part of that. And then we go in the next phase and do all the special ed accommodation. And then in the next phase, but hit all the elementary schools, if we're not going to replace them, with the things in a wave so that everybody feels like they're getting something. Because we're going to be asking for a lot of money from people. And you want to feel like you're getting something. So the middle school, I feel like people feel like they'll be getting something because their kid goes there. So anyway, that's just a thought that we have.
Thank you.
So our table was in agreement that we should replace the old middle school. A big aspect of this decision was just that the middle school is currently 3 buildings, one of which being really nice and new. So it wouldn't be too difficult to, like with adding portables during the construction period, it wouldn't be too difficult to house everyone because you could keep 2 buildings running at all times until all 3 are finished, or maybe if you would like to connect them all, that could be done using the side of the building. Also, it's just kind of like I went to the middle school with the new building for 1 year, and it's just kind of a weird environment with because the schools are so separate and so distinct and like even aesthetically just so different. I had one class in the new school and it was just such a different vibe, and all the students were kind of split apart. This is also kind of getting into another issue with like the E2 program, but the middle school, one of the biggest issues with the middle school was the division within the school, and having 3 separate buildings like this certainly like exacerbates that issue. So I think the middle school would be the easiest thing to get, like, again, because pretty much everyone benefits from it. It'd be pretty easy to get people to support it. Halfway, like they're already halfway done. So that's, again, a pretty convincing factor. And, yeah.
Great. Thank you very much.
Our group also agreed for every single person deciding replacement. Kind of touching on some of the kind of things Will said, is that I was at the middle school. I spent the first year in portable, the second year in the new building, the third year in the old building. So I got full range. And it's definitely the type of thing where it's so different, the building. The old building kind of, there's tons of things I feel that needed to be renovated and kind of like modernized to kind of go to that standard. And I feel like with the amount of things that need to be done for modernization, it might even exceed the cost of trying to do a whole new building, considering all the way all the buildings are separated, as well as kind of like the environment with kind of like the crampedness and like it's kind of, you know, it feels very like separated and isolated, like all the long hallways that aren't really connected and some of the underutilized space, as well as the safety concerns that come with kind of all buildings being separated, and trying to just connect them with something that would be to be corrected later, also considering for like aesthetic concerns, because it's so different. It kind of feels like you see like the new middle school building, and it's like, oh, what's that in the back? And it's like the older buildings.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions about any cross-table questions about the middle school or anything? Okay. And it sounded like, at least coming from the first table, there's some sort of missing information that made it difficult for you guys to make some decisions one way or the other. It sounded a little bit like that in the elementary school too for some of the groups.
Yeah, big budget numbers. Like,
Yeah.
Is there a plan available for the middle school as an extension to what was done as part of the?
There were some sort of loose, I'll call them conceptual studies, really looking at different alternatives for how you might look at replacing those buildings. I don't know that any of them were really, because it's not a project, and so they didn't go too far into it. But there has been that exploration. Okay, so no questions about the middle school. Anything about I neglected to ask if you had any questions about the elementary thing from table to table. Okay, all right. So we can move to the next exercise. Oh, Rich. So, you guys are doing so amazing, we're gonna go a whole 5 minutes. But not a minute more. Level, you also see one, so don't mistake them, one that's specifically related to CREST. So we're gonna do the comprehensive high school one here, and we've got the we'll do CREST after this. And the question for this is, should facility management of the high school focus solely on renovation and modernization of building systems? So fixing stuff and maybe even taking it to the next level. Or should need associated with educational adequacy, which are the whole list of these programmatic things here, also be included? And if so, what educational adequacy needs should be addressed and why? And you can say, well, they all should be addressed, or if you do have specific, these three in our opinion should be the first ones that in your opinion need to be addressed, we'd love to hear that too. Question?
Sorry, I forgot, are these supposed to be like, if we're looking only at the high school?
Only at the high school.
And we ignore everything else?
Yes.
It's not like,
this is
this
only.
could help, but we've got other priorities.
Yeah, this is only at the high school. So be thinking just of what would you, how would you really facility manage the high school over time? And you'll probably have noted here, we took a little bit of a leap. We made an assumption here. And you can push back on this assumption. I'll say that. Our assumption was, because the high school, both in its scoring, the facility condition scoring, you walk through the high school, it's pretty modern and new, that in the scope of this long-range plan, meaning, let's say 30 years or so, something like that, replacement of the high school was probably highly unlikely. If you look over at like the long haul, 70 years from now or something, sure, maybe it kicks in at that point. But again, we're really looking at maybe a horizon line of, think of maybe those phases we're talking about, 10 or 15, 20 or 30, so you're talking about a total of 30 or 40 years. If you say, I'm not so sure about that, maybe 40 years from now you want to place it, you can push back on this. I do want to take a little walk through this educational adequacy component. None of these I think are new to you, you've seen them all. So there's been discussion about science remodels in the school, additional athletic practice spaces, additional team rooms, some modifications and improvements to the library, career and college prep here, improvements in that area. So that goes back to some of the points about occupational learning counseling improvements. So that was consolidation of counseling and reconfiguring it for many different reasons. Theater improvements and possible addition of a black box. And then there were other miscellaneous improvements. And just to kind of tip our hat to the staff person who wrote the email in, just the general classroom sort of upgrades and stuff too that he had identified in bullet points. So you'll have the same kind of procedure, have a conversation about 8 or 9 minutes, whether or not basically you want to push beyond just sort of the basic maintenance items and get into the modernization components of this. Okay? And you'll check your box and report out to the group. All right? Go ahead.
So high school replacement is awesome.
Obviously, you look at that chart, that is by far the biggest, but I even think there's 4 votes on another category that are really the same. So I feel like that's something that really needs to be part of this. It's not there, the flexible spaces. Or that just
or it
small,
needs to be called
the
out
small
under
group, or the small group setting that
Well, wait, yeah, might be not having
educational adequacy. robotics.
I don't think we're talking really more of that.
The 4 classroom spaces had about the last science classrooms. They were, so now there's those robotics.
But one of those other in that labs, which I don't know if that's they use, but I mean, just robotics, because it doesn't just have to be robotics, there's a lot of different tech things that.
They're just labs, basically.
But more so
Like creative spaces.
Yes.
And like,
I think we call them creative spaces.
Maker spaces. They call it maker spaces, I saw that, so maker spaces, then we need maker
Well, I know for chemistry, maybe
things like that. I mean, I think that's what they're talking about.
kids, like, they don't do big labs because they can't. Yeah, so, I mean, science.
Especially if we're trying to do the STEAM because that's what kids know.
Things like that, it means taking away some other type of course. And, because you can't have everything. So it's like, what would they really be offering?
Just last month about so she was saying how the need for this is huge. Like we're not even realizing that that they're not offering enough to engage a lot of the different learners or to, and so she said that the CCR, I mean she's talking in this kind of robotic CCR, but I mean like she was huge. I mean we're not even interested. I mean a lot of them a lot of them they want to
career in that. Like there is. It's amazing. My husband works for Amazon. Trust me, Jordan's gonna be huge.
I mean, that's what they're talking about.
But I also want to say,
Maybe teachers.
Music teachers, drama, which is great, and I agree, we need to include that. I mean, there's black boxes.
There's also some of that over here.
Like this.
Yeah, which needs to,
Can you do this and this without that? Yes for that.
And then there's, the JV field.
It doesn't seem like a full-size refrigerator is there.
Well, I don't know what the I'm just saying, I don't think it's
we can see, I mean, we should, and that's where some of our, like, quiet spaces and collaborative spaces, in the library, and also be and even, did you read what the teacher says, even our shelving, in our counters that they use at the elementary school, the high school teacher saying we don't need those anymore. Because that could become, they don't need those. So that's some things that could be taken out.
lockers are all right there.
But would you want to have it by themselves?
It is right by themselves.
So the students could still walk back?
Oh, yeah, no, and the teachers team.
Like the science team,
To meet more, and I don't remember there's some class, people don't have
But there's that needs that I think. That they don't.
That's a huge goal. But still, even 35 is huge.
No, it's a lot for them.
And now
They're popular, they're really,
That's great, because for high school, you need things like this for buy-in from kids, so that they stay in school. I know that, I don't know what the dropout rate is here, but dropout rates, right, there's always like a couple kids that are on alert. You just want every kid to make something of themselves.
I think that was just all
Yeah, it wasn't private,
And do you
so
think
if
there's
you
more
wanted to go talk to the
collaborative
counselor,
presence? That's where
Very much. Yeah, because they have a
Yeah, you could probably put a kitchen of some sort.
There is a little, I mean, right now they're under, but they want to, like, not put that in.
I feel like scratching full from all of these, writing partial and moving all this to here. And doing all of these.
Like an out of the box thinker. I
No, they walk on the sidewalk. It's just over the track. I mean, in front of the track. Sorry. I mean, last year they actually did a shuttle during the snow because the sidewalks were dangerous, so they had to kind of it's no big deal.
So does that make all of these?
So is the room over by the regular high school also built that capacity building?
Right. But there's none,
In the
but
back.
there's not, that doesn't exist. That's all part of the advantage.
I feel like the time, so when you think about prioritizing, they have us then put things on the timeline. So toward the end, not toward the end, but some of the elementary schools or the middle schools, just more critical.
Well,
the CCR, the flexible space are priorities. It's not. Yeah, so maybe we want to.
That's, yeah.
So of the things we
Or should we just say?
and then would that create room to
This is so, everything's so different here.
I feel like CCR and then first of all, as much as we don't want to.
Some things in
Okay, we should probably wrap up checking the boxes. Or at least start checking if you haven't already.
So we're saying that flexible space.
how we're gonna prioritize.
And I feel like reconfiguration. Yeah, like
We're also looking at improvements, like rebuild, new buildings.
those little
Fourth, fourth and a half.
which is more.
I mean, I think it would be really hard to just justify replacing credits unless you're putting invested in it. Like, right? Yeah.
That's a nice to have.
Well, I don't, well, there's I mean, they're easy, but they do, I think, at the high school. So I don't really know what they remaining siloed.
But at the high school, do they have a lot of smaller things? Do they?
That's, you know, anything that, I consider that special.
So they would be more.
Counseling.
No, I know. No, it needs it.
I thought the counseling was more that they're not connected. I didn't think it was that they're on display. I thought it was that they're not really connected, like they're not by the post. The R&R is across the room. This is, so is it mental or academic? Because their academic and health is on one side. Something too. Yeah. But I don't. Maybe a private. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think they want
Right?
But they're not out in the open. They're not out in the open. They're not connected with the nurse, or they're like on they're on the whole opposite side of nurse and.
There was something about confidentiality there, that something that you were going to announce was very obvious you were going to announce. And the kids were.
Any other detail?
Right, because that's
If it, with,
the
if it
hallway
were
and
the
you go
nurse and
down.
other stuff, it could be, well, they have a headache. They have a
Kind of a gathering space. The two gathering spaces at the front.
All right, how are we doing with getting the approaches identified in the boxes? Okay. Would you like to share out?
We understood and tried to recognize and fight against the comparison envy between Mercer Island and Sammamish High School and Mount Si High School, all of which look like something out of Star Wars or something. So, but we're all in agreement about modernization, especially with all of these different enhanced spaces. We thought we might want to replace, but given the priorities between the high school and the elementary schools, we were thinking more of the replacement for the elementary schools rather than the high school. But given the priorities that we've identified in terms of enhancing the space needs for the high school, both now and in the future, we've got to recognize that we need all these different spaces here. The one interesting comment we had was that in terms of the theater space and the black box, we might want to collaborate more fully with the city and the MICA people, if in fact MICA becomes a reality, so that we can share the space and at least collaborate on that.
Great, thank you. Table 2.
So we voted for modernization with the educational adequacy improvements and kind of looking at this with Crest and the admin building because just feel like Crest needs work, and we feel like Crest and the CCNR are really focusing on the same type of thing. It's not alternate education and program-based learning, and also doing, looking at doing a black box there, thinking about where in the high school would that even go with the current facilities. Could even put in some labs for science, but basically create a new building where, for example, like the bottom floor could be the CCNR, robotics lab and culinary arts or whatever it is that's decided that wants to be there. Second floor be the Crest learning space, and then the top floor be admin. And that way, I know we get the benefits of having, students are in the building and we get added benefits from building in that way. But also, one of the big things is as much as there shouldn't be, there is still the stigma of going to Crest. If we move other programs to the same place, it tremendously reduces, would tremendously reduce that stigma, where all students have to take a CCNR class, so they're all going anyways, and it becomes more of a community, while the Crest kids still have their family that I know is such a huge draw for so many of them, but they still would have that space that would be separate from the rest so that they have that, smaller based learning that they need. So it would just, I think, accomplish a lot of those things, as well as it could be done without really having a tremendous impact on the high school at the time of the building too. So everyone here thought that was a good idea. It was really kind of problem solving a lot of different things and creating new spaces for them.
Great, thank you. Table 3.
All right, so we are all actually in the modernization column as well, with one caveat, and that is if you take the word full off of every one of these, strike it and make it partial, and move it into the significant maintenance renovation column. Right? The thought being that trying to do a full seismic upgrade to the whole high school all at once seemed hard. I'll just put it that way. And the thought was then that might start to free up the thinking to create more of these sort of educational adequacy improvements, which we thought were all really, really good. We highlighted a few. The science remodel / robotics room / maker spaces was high on the list. The CCNR improvements was high on the list. Just flexible spaces in general are high on the list. A library reconfiguration, we called it, instead of necessarily an improvement, though that would be an improvement. But that's where we end up.
Great, thank you.
Here at table 4, actually following closely behind table 3 here, we felt, certainly the educational adequacy was important, but not modernization. The systems themselves are sufficient, we feel, in there. There's certainly the maintenance and the renovation and the continuous improvements in that system, but not the wholesale, let's replace HVAC or the plumbing or electrical. But certainly focusing on that educational improvement or adequacy improvements. There are some highlights: teachers' offices, the counseling, the CCR, stadium bleachers. That's got to be done. That's one area where we just need to rip it out and redo it. But anyways,
Cover them.
because that's been covered, yes, covered, because it's really painful to go to a game.
Provide a cushion.
Even then, even then. But anyways, that's kind of the approach we looked at. It was really just focusing on those educational opportunities and improving how the school is used, but not doing a wholesale, modernization.
Totally makes sense. Yeah, great. Thank you.
We also went for the kind of modernization, but also focused on the educational adequacy improvements. Definitely a lot more than the top section. But we thought something that was really important and something we really need to know is the utilization of spaces and whether some of the problems that might be having with counseling, especially whether it's the question of how the space is being utilized or whether there's not enough space, and how kind of like knowing how to use the space when a new space is implemented is just as important as the new space itself, because if a renovation happens and the same kind of like problems maybe with like isolation and students not reaching out still occur, then it kind of feels like we go to waste. But yeah, we also circled some specific things, mostly with the CCR improvements and library improvements, because they're kind of things that would try to benefit the entirety of the student body, and things that students would presently kind of like see that they would use, and things that would actively affect everyday student life.
Great, excellent. Yeah. I would say pretty much almost across the board, you really made the leap to the key point of the high school, which is when we looked at the high school, more than I think any other grade level, there was a lot more specificity regarding particular programmatic improvements and enhancements that were identified here. And for what it's worth, my 2 cents would be the sort of leap you guys made from, let's maintain it and then focus on the programmatic pieces, which leaves sort of the other full modernization. I would characterize it as on an as-needed basis only, driven by some calamity that might be happening. But focusing on the educational programming makes a ton of sense. And so I think the consistency there is a really good thing that you guys are talking about. And one of the tables already made the leap to Crest. And that's a great sort of segue into this, because one of the questions around Crest really is, how does it really play in as a piece of the puzzle, right? There are so many different ways you can look at it. So here, the idea is, do you support continued renovation and modernization of building systems when needed in that building, or do you also support addressing the capacity and educational adequacy points at Crest? And you may remember from a capacity standpoint, there was a discussion of really being able to serve, even under the approach that the way that it's currently been done, up to maybe 50% more than what is already there. So there's a capacity issue there. And if you do support the capacity and educational adequacy pieces as well, besides just maintaining the building, and assuming that the adult training program is not part of Crest, there's a little component in that building, so let's just kind of hold that off to the side for a moment. What is the best approach for adding capacity? Is it, and also addressing educational adequacy, by the way, is it renovate and expand the existing building, so you know where it is on the site, so would that be expanded, assuming you could? To remodel a larger building on the high school site and relocate Crest there. For example, one possibility is you might remodel the admin building, it's bigger, and locate CREST and perhaps other programs there. Or maybe there's another entirely different approach that you want to talk about as well. So on this sheet, you're already on a path where you're saying, yeah, we know, we get it, you gotta do significant maintenance. That's been something you said on every one of these so far. And you're immediately jumping to the questions around modernization. So here you are, you can either do it within the existing building. Here's the existing capacity, and you would be adding to it in some way. And then part of the main program piece, by the way, at CREST that was talked about is really either a larger or an additional greenhouse. There's some smaller programmatic pieces. Or there are other approaches to CREST, and there's been some discussion about that already. So we're really interested in hearing what your thoughts are about dealing with it within the existing or finding some other approach. And that may or may not be linked directly to the comprehensive high school component as well. Okay. So take a few minutes and sort of discuss that. I know this table is already down the road on that discussion.
Oh, it's right by my greenhouse.
Or I wonder if I could go back towards the bus. There's some space down there, but there's not a lot to make it 50%. But that program is it's really from everyone I know that's involved in it. I had a daughter at SAS, and so when it's doing I mean, I know you. It is an amazing program, and my daughter you know that was all of a sudden she came to as a farm that I had in addition to the middle school. I do not know that. How do you justify that? And I'm thinking, I know about 12 kids doing this online high school, and I'm thinking, how is that sustained all these kids? But now, I mean, those are, kids that would have never thought of ever, who are downtown. How big is the Addis building?
I don't think people really
Is that big enough?
It's not one floor.
No, it's just one floor.
Well, there's a basement of the college.
I love having this
isolated right now.
Yeah. Such a the one thing I will say,
If they don't, it won't be done.
lose class time before it's because they have to have they lose 5 minutes on the permit. Yeah, and maybe you can put some communities in there. So they lose. Sorry, I like your
So maybe
are you guys on Mac?
back parking lot. Because so the kids want more parking. If you take that back parking lot and you build back there and give them where the administrative building is and where Crest is as their new lot, does that
So back parking lot is boys and girls.
so then move the kids from their kid lot, like shuffle everyone.
Back that house and all that stuff too. You still have to have a road and all that like that.
Yeah. I mean, is there somewhere on campus to put it closer to campus and then just shuffle something else down to that more
Really, but like a lot of places have like administrators park in the administration building, like high school administrators park. So they're doing that now. I don't know because I saw Henderson one time or Wolf. He comes down to like. I was like,
around there. And it's like, so aren't you in school? I'm like, oh wait, they probably are in school. And then
Crest part of the town. So they're down. No, I don't put that a lot. Okay. But the kids at least 10 minutes. If it's a 50-minute class. Oh, maybe. That's how bad. Right. Yeah.
Right? But I mean, if they got a new practice field on the other side.
I like whatever you want to know how that is. But I mean, like,
there's space.
In which building?
It seems like it's a question of either you move it to the regular part of the campus or you make what's there attractive enough.
And do we get, because that's the only thing I don't like is
It's not.
they have to walk that
No,
much.
yeah.
10 minutes a day.
Yeah.
Over, and so it's 4 days a like cosplayer, basically. Like, they were saying add another story onto something at the high school, right? Isn't that what they were saying? They were saying, I mean, like, they didn't say where, they were saying, but like three-level building. That kind of loud. I don't know that.
Can we even go up 3 floors?
But if we added out of, if we.
It's a height thing, not necessarily.
So it would
We
basement
increase the
floors.
height and then it's the admin. Look at the vouchers.
And that's hard to
Find a low spot. Go from there.
Yeah. They would use the time going back and forth. It would be less of a So are we talking about part of the high school?
Right.
Yes. It'd be nice if there could be a separate building closer to the high school.
Yeah.
And they need it.
Because it is so.
When you think about having to get to a class, it's not far. When you think about being on a schedule, having it to a class, that's
But
And maybe it's even just, or I think some of it's just, and maybe it's even just a causeway, to another. Like it's connected, but not connected, like not right up to it, but it's, yeah.
So,
Right, kind of like Island Park. Like they're the same, but not.
Are you worried if we force too much into that building, that some of the kids are frustrated and turn off?
I think.
Do you think it's too much?
So if we don't sit real close.
So the isolation is an asset in some ways.
The buffer is needed.
Hardcore kid, yeah. Right. But then there are a bunch of kids that are
But do you think it was they were on a whole separate floor where people came in here and like,
Unless there was a separate entrance or something.
yeah,
Like the robot lab would have on one side, press comes in the back side of it.
I mean, that's something.
That's a different thing.
I feel like there's something kind of harder. Yeah, this is a hard one.
So could we fit that in potentially in the new building too, like the cooking?
I think sometimes
Administration building is larger than practice.
Dang.
And then a lot of, but that's too, it's too, I mean, yeah, like it's a floor and a half.
Yeah, the administrative building is rather large in comparison to Crest.
And a lot of them, yeah, so there's, I think that's what makes it. Yeah, you wouldn't think it, but yeah.
And now they're not using it. It's an admin, but they're using it,
Yeah.
But, they don't, I don't think that they need
But the administration, they haven't even brought up the very late pool. That's all that some of the things were, like, there is heavy on the pool.
I think those administration not connected to school. Like if they're connected to,
No, that's
especially
true.
like Crest, like that would feel even administration. Yeah, but I right now I think.
But I don't see any problem with
Yeah, yes, yeah.
And maybe we could do this.
But either way, we're at today's still high school.
Right.
That's the right. But that's their job. That's the architecture.
Well, I think we all.
I don't, it doesn't have to be on campus.
But they combine the admin to would that be not a good thing? Like there isn't another. Except they have always kind of, but then that doesn't
I guess
seem
you
that
look
much
at that,
bigger.
you could just look at the admin Crest area as real estate. Like on that real estate, this is what is needed, not this building. That building should have administrative building, I don't really know how to
Now I'm really, so what if the bus barn, if you got rid of the crest
It looks
building,
like
could they
prison
put
for
the
the
bus
19.
location, like the bus parking lot?
This
Definitely gone, because they would exit through there and you put a building where the exit of the bus parking thing is now, so they just have to go to the other side of the stadium. Which isn't, well, that's still quite a bit closer.
I can't, I know, I haven't even been, I'm not sure.
Okay, let me set the tone, let me set the scene.
Probably at this table.
But I don't know what.
No, it's way too nice out there, right? It's way too nice out there.
I mean, I think we all agree that it needs to have something done. I don't know where another facility would be.
They don't have replacement, which is
How would
unfortunate.
they host Crest somewhere else being rebuilt? Is there even a way of doing that? Like, let's say we.
But maybe that's not our. That's not our. I don't see.
They need a new building. They need a new building. Because it sounds like it's just.
Except the admin building.
Or like high school, a second story on the high school, and like you could build it with a second story or some type of.
I think it does.
Okay, how are we doing?
It would be, my thing is, it would be nice to have.
Are we at a point where we're getting something that can be shared out?
Get a new facility.
Yes. Love it.
Well, I don't know where we can do, and then see if Chris
We'll give
goes,
them
then they
another
can
minute.
come out a different, maybe they defeat.
Because there's such, one or two tables are still going there.
Where the Crest facility, like moving, so you know how the bus.
Okay, I'm seeing this.
The buses park here and Crest
Okay,
is over
table
there.
number one is
This goes
prepared to
away.
share out.
Put a building here and
information on
have
Crest. Thoughts on
them in and out
Crest?
here. I don't even know if
We're drawing
that's a
on the
possibility.
wisdom of tables 2 and 3. Previously reported, we think the idea of integrating Crest with, within the high school, if not the building itself, within the high school area is extremely valuable. And I think the other one on table 3 of saying we're not going to spend a lot of money in upgrading a deficient building right now, so we're going to say just do partial modernization, renovation work only as needed. We couldn't make any decisions here in terms of the two options because we don't know whether it would be better to integrate into an existing facility like the administration building or an entirely new facility. But choose one and we're all in favor.
Yeah, ditto, I think.
Okay,
So we're sticking with our prior
okay,
decision
okay,
to integrate Crest and CCNR and a black box
okay.
and the admin.
And when you say integrate, just so I'm clear on it, you mean literally it is much, physically much more integrated with the comprehensive high school?
Or maybe take down the admin building and the Crest building today and build one new place housing all of that together.
I see. Okay,
Economies of scale.
yeah, okay. Number 3.
Okay, well, we didn't check any boxes yet, because we were still kind of in discussion.
Okay.
We feel Crest needs to be relocated. We weren't opposed to it being at the high school, but felt if it was connected to the high school, it still had to have some, a feel of being separate. So we didn't know if a causeway or something to a different building, so I guess a new structure. But, and then felt pretty strongly that the atmosphere at Crest is, there's a lot of students who like being separate from the high school, so if you combined it with the CCR, there were separate entrances on how you get there.
Okay. Can you, and if you can't, that's fine, but can you elaborate on some of the thought behind why you felt it needed to be relocated? And if you can't, that's
A lot of it
far.
is too far. They're
Is it?
losing they're losing classes.
Okay, okay, yeah, great.
Okay, we're gonna hitchhike on a couple of these and then come on to some of our own. Should not be part of the high school, but it should be closer. That's one of the things we're talking about. Sometimes Crest students really, the comprehensive high school is not a good fit, and getting into it or being close to it would not be good because they might not go. We wanted to make sure that it was designed for flexible spaces and more individualized learning. The offices and things where teachers working individually with students are very limiting, and there's the big room, and then there are a couple of classrooms, and there's really not places for small group project learning and hands-on learning, that type of thing. We decided that the best place would be to swap the pool and Crest. So we put Crest where Mary went. Hey, we get to dream, don't we? So we decided that Crest should be located where Mary Wade is because of the proximity to the high school. You could really have quick access to the classes, yet it's very separate. You could be part of the admin as long as they had totally separate entrances. And then where the admin is would be a wonderful place to put the pool because it's right close to the peak, and wouldn't that be a wonderful complex? And we have a contractor who will build it. Yeah.
We can fully finish checking out the boxes, but we were discussing mostly about again like a new facility for Crest, kind of trying to utilize the space a little better, talking about multiple story things like that, as well as moving it closer to the high school, making it not like attached to the high school, not like building more classrooms on the high school, but kind of something that was comprehensively closer, but still something enough to be like Crest as its own identity, as well as kind of like thinking about the parking lot space that's being utilized close to the high school, and how there's a lot of discussion with there's not enough parking, and you know buses aren't being used as much, so trying to figure out whether it'd be better to kind of reconfigure the space that's being used around the high school, whether they're talking about like fields or parking lots or Crest itself, and being able to be closer.
Right. So just so I'm clear on that, one example might be if you could find a new place for some of the parking, you might move Crest into where some of the parking is.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you for that. Any other overall general comments about Crest beyond, or any questions, table to table questions that you might have? A lot of consistency with that facility.
I also think raising the general kind of community-wide awareness of what Crest is all about would be really helpful.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Just what are the programs and how valuable it is for the community. I think that's a bit of a mystery to a lot of people.
Excellent point. So as you have already gathered, and as we said up front, this is a ultra high level sort of look or start discussion about these facilities. You know, it was not intended to get into any weeds, not any detail, although you've gone into a little bit higher level detail, which is great because it kind of starts backfilling some of the whys of why you might do some things. So hopefully we have achieved really the first objective that we had tonight, which is to open the conversation about some broad thinking and approaches to each of the grade levels. Really nothing more than that, okay? What I have gathered, and we'll sort of try and sum this up in some meeting minutes and get them on the website and get them out to you so that you can look at them and say, yes, I heard that too, amongst all the groups, or no, you guys are misrepresenting it, we've got to change these meeting minutes, whatever comes to that. But what I heard, there's a pretty high level of consistency across all of the grades where renovation, going beyond renovation is almost just a given in a way at each of the grades. You quickly jumped over that. I don't think there was a single, maybe one box check, but I don't think so even, of just keeping it back in significant maintenance. You made the jump. And so the conversations were really where and here between these two are you going to land? What makes the most sense? For a number of the grades, and I'm holding one where replacement's grayed out, so I'm going to swap that. For a number of the grade levels, there was a pretty strong representation in the long-term thinking about replacement of facilities. Certainly for certain middle school buildings and elementary, some of the elementaries as well. So that was a pretty strong feeling there. And some back in modernization. And at the high school level, which I think makes a lot of sense and is interesting, is really looking at significant maintenance and what I would call a direct jump in a way to the programmatic components and only dealing with the more full systemic modernization on a purely as needed basis if and when that needed to happen. But to jump right over to the program components. So that's pretty strong too. And Crest, what I heard across the board was kind of relocation, bring it in closer if you can, but don't connect it because there needs to have a clear identity as well. And then some combination of Crest programs with the CCR components in there. So you've actually talked about and a ton of stuff tonight. You've really exceeded what our objective was, gone beyond even the high level. What we're going to be doing next time is we're going to develop some exercises that will then get us down to the next level of thinking, and really be probably talking a bit more about prioritization, specific prioritization pieces, and then linking that prioritization to, okay, if this is the long-term plan for prioritization of your facilities, how does that then relate to some of the short-term needs, and what are your opinions regarding those things? How do they relate to each other? So we'll develop that stuff, and there'll be some other things we'll talk about. We do have a few minutes left because we've been really efficient how we've gone over this. So I'm going to go a little bit off script for about 5 minutes or so. We had developed these exercises only for the school buildings, the school building pieces, as I'm sure you've recognized. That was really driven primarily by time limitations. We figured we could only have so many exercises in a 3-hour meeting. We have a little bit more time, and what I'd like to just throw out there is in maybe the next 5 or 10 minutes max, if any of you, and some of you have made reference to this already, have any thoughts or comments about some of the non-school district facilities. That would include the pool building, that would include the admin building, that would include other support buildings out there.
The pool came up a lot in the email, the forms that you sent to us to read. That Mary Wade pool is mentioned a lot, so I think it's definitely on people's minds. So perhaps that's something to look at. I mean, I talked to someone on Saturday that runs the programs there, and I said, oh yeah, we've been talking about this in facilities planning, and the pool comes up, and she's like, oh please. So she was like, it needs it. So I feel like there's a desire in the community for a community type of pool. There isn't I mean, Mary Waite's all we have as far as a community type pool on the island. Everything else is private. You have to pay substantial money to get into them. So I think the pool needs to be talked about a little bit.
Okay. Any other thoughts about any of those facilities? Yeah.
Well, and kind of piggybacking on that and looking at that master plan, right next to the pool is the maintenance and bus barn. A bus barn that doesn't even serve the high school because the kids don't take the buses to high school. Is an opportunity to relocate that and then really just develop that whole section from, where the admin building is now, a pool, other sporting facilities, kind of going all the way down into the, the football field and back up again. Is there an opportunity to do that and then, build a much nicer community sports area in that block? And then I don't know where you put the buses, but obviously you have to put them somewhere. But is there an opportunity to put it somewhere else in the building?
Right. But it could be something that could certainly be looked at, and if you would want to start by seeing if there's any way to use existing district property, obviously, to try and play a shell game to some extent. Yeah. Yes.
I do think, again, we're talking long-term plans here, certainly over 30, 40, 50, long time. I think having sort of a graded level plan for something like that where, all those facilities, because, right now the baseball field that we utilize for the high school is, halfway down the island, which is totally disconnected from, where the high school actually is.
Yeah.
and obviously having so trying to, you know, if we're taking the opportunity to think about our land use and being on an island, certainly that's at a premium when we only have so much. You know, really thinking long-term about how that's being utilized and structured and, you know, that kind of thing. Whether, I mean, I agree with the pool, you know, is a huge issue. I'm sure it's a really expensive one too, but also would be more of certainly a community, you know, thing in addition to, you know, a school district type of thing that, you know, could be utilized. But having that long-term rollout, like whether it's, you know, this and then 15, 20, 30, you know, that kind of thing. But having that plan for that sort of what they might have termed a mega block, if you will, area, I think is a good thing to do.
Okay, great. Yeah.
The administration building is inadequate. I don't know a better way to place it. There are not enough small conference spaces or project meeting spaces or even enough office spaces. If you happen to be in a wheelchair and upstairs and would like to go to a meeting at the boardroom, you have to go outside, around the corner and down. So it's not ADA easily accessible. There are just many issues with it, but to me, that's a rebuild, not a patch it up. And so therefore, if you're doing that, perhaps there's a better location for it, so you could use that corner.
Okay, yeah, interesting, yeah.
For the pool. Because we have all the money in the world.
It seems like it's a master planning effort, and I would argue that when you look at the transportation hub, exactly, it's right in the heart of our whole campus, and it's full of buses. And I would argue that it probably should have been done before the peak went in, because it's still all around the edges, but they're still there, all those buses, and I know we don't have a lot of land, but I think it's a master planning issue with all the facilities and really looking at what our lot coverage is and how many additional square footage footprints we can put on.
Yep.
I think that's a critical component to that whole, before we dump any money into any new buildings, is to look at that.
So the high school site, and I know there have been sort of some studies for the mega block site, it seems like there are just a lot of pieces in play, many of which have been discussed tonight. Crest, right, is one. The bus piece, the pool, and the admin building. And the thing is they're all big moves, right? To think about any one of those pieces, and it's a big move. And so I'm going to just ask a question which kind of is going to tap into your, as a Mercer Island, you know, soothsayer, community member, looking into the crystal ball of people you know. You know, of those types of buildings, with the exception of Crest, none of which are directly related to educational programs. I'll just throw that out kind of as a loose general statement. How much support from the general community would there be for pools and admin and moving bus parking areas and those kinds of things?
You might get some for the pool, but for the bus?
I think if you could present a plan of what was going to happen. I think that's been the biggest problem that we've run into in the community is we want to do this, or we want to do this, or we want to do this, or we want to do that. Right. And we need a bunch of money, and you give it to us, and then we'll figure it out. I think it's got to be a little bit of turning that around to saying, okay, this is what it might look like. We have to maybe put a little bit of money into planning and taking some of the stuff that we come up with, but saying, you know, if the bus barn went out, the benefit would be. If this moved out, the benefit would be. Right. So that people have a clear picture of that direction. Right.
And I think you have to roll something like rebuilding or remodeling or whatever, the admin building, into another school play. I mean, so they go together, because there is nobody, I think, that would say, why, yes, let's build a new administration.
Yes, and I would think if you build that whole purpose and program as to why, and actually, you know, have the right people up front, you know, pitching and speaking it,
Yes.
it's sellable, certainly it's sellable. And
But
it's
not by itself.
But not by, well, it's also not the biggest ticket item
Right.
we're talking about here.
Right.
An admin building is probably the cheapest item we're talking
Right.
about. So there's an opportunity to, as you say, to either fold it in or just make it a piece of something, but it's, I think, you know, ultimately, it's that grander plan, it's that master plan.
Yeah.
Where do we wanna be in 20, 30 years?
Right.
And this is what it's gonna take to get there.
One of the things that came up in the material you sent was coordination with city offices and services and garages and all that kind of stuff. What kind of possibilities are there there?
Well, the short answer is I don't know. I'll be very truthful about it. You know, if through conversation with the district and or any of you, for that matter, who might be in the know, if there were opportunities where you could partner with an organization, I think now is the time that that consideration should be brought to the table. What I would also say, though, is that if that type of partnership, if you started to go down the road and hang your hat on that type of partnership, then not too far in the future, you're going to want to get some sort of memorandum of understanding where each partner clearly understands what they're getting out of it and why they would enter into that partnership. And you're only doing that because you're now hanging your hat on that as what you're counting on, right? So I would just say, if any of you or if any of your community members out there know of possible partnerships for the things that we've been talking about, right? Like, so the theater has been thrown out, you know, if you were to do a bigger one, you know, I don't know about the pool piece, could be bus parking piece, whatever. You know, certainly bring those thoughts to the table. It doesn't hurt to bring them to the table. They might fall off, they might stay on the table for further discussion. The last thing I'll say about partnerships is, and this is not to say that small partnerships are not worthy, because they are. In the context of long-range facility planning, I would focus primarily on potential partnerships that are going to be significant moves in your long-range plan, that are going to get you, in other words, you know, if someone offers up as part of a partnership something that's worth $250,000 or whatever, I'll just throw that out. That's amazing. That's great. It's phenomenal and graciously accepted, and thank them for that, obviously. But what we're really talking about here in terms of these big moves, whether it be parking your buses in a parking lot somewhere else that somebody knows and you can count on that, or whatever, that's worth millions and millions of dollars. And that's the kind of thing that's very impactful in the context of a long-range plan, because it breaks open pieces, but then frees up how you think about the other pieces. Does that make sense? So keep that in mind as you're thinking about those partnerships.
Well, Steve was gonna volunteer the parking behind, the police department. There's lots of the buses fit there.
Well, and if we put a bus barn there, some sort of a module that would cover up the buses, that would be more palatable to the community, and it would also save the life of the buses. It'd be a lot less expensive as far as replacement of the buses if they were covered.
Okay, any other final comments about any of these other facilities? I'm sure we're going to revisit this, by the way, so don't feel like this is your only chance. Okay? If not, we're finished about 10 minutes early. Next time, we'll be in meeting 2 of our 3 planning meetings. We'll start to get to a higher level of detail, start to ask you a few more detailed questions, and get you to sort of commit or give us a little more information regarding prioritization and those sorts of things. So, all right?
We should get like ballpark figures that might be attached to any of these moves at some point, because it's kind of hard to evaluate without knowing, you know, how much of it is this versus that.
Right.
In terms of a long-term levy potential, or does that come into the process?
Probably not specific dollar numbers on this. I think it's probably what is probably going to happen is we keep it at a higher level, similar to what we've done here. And what I would say is you should feel free to ask us about, our rough order of magnitude opinion on one approach given the other versus say, are they both $4 signs, or do you think this is going to be $4+ sign kind of thing? Mm-hmm. And we can, I think, give you some feedback there regarding the sort of relative value or cost of a given approach. So for those of you then who might be kind of on the fence with regard to a given approach, if you knew, they're going to be probably both in the $4 signs approach, you could say, well, if you tell me that, then this is my preference. Mm-hmm. And that's really what we kind of want to know.
I think another component to that is time as well. Is one component, significantly shorter, or does it cause fewer displacement issues or for shorter periods of time?
Yes, exactly, and the operational component. So, you talked about that kind of halfway through this effort of, how do any of these approaches impact ongoing operations? And, some of the ways to handle really the management of facilities are going to do it in a phased approach as you modernize it over time, and could be relatively impactful to those ongoing operations. And they could have a cost impact too, because you're dragging out mobilization over a longer period of time. So keep those issues in your head as you're starting to think through this. You probably already sensed that this is a complex knot of different things that you need to kind of keep at the forefront. Operationally, rough order of magnitude, relative cost comparison kind of thing, because those conversations need to play into some of the things you're thinking about, and ultimately some of the recommendations you're probably going to put forth. So, okay? All right.
Thank you.
I think we're done. Please come back for the second meeting. Do not leave us.
Yeah, nice chatting with you.